Thank you, and welcome everyone to this special installment of Climate Desk Live at South by Southwest. I am Chris Mooney, as you heard. Our very first order of business is Twitter, okay? Throughout this panel, we want you to be tweeting. If we don't see your heads buried down in your devices, we're going to think that you're not paying attention, okay? So everybody got that? Please be tweeting. We are the Climate Desk, and these are our partner organizations. The Climate Desk is a media consortium of journalistic outlets covering climate change. We share stories, we pool resources. This allows us to do more, and you can find out a lot more at climatedesk.org. So our topic today is the media, and to start us out, I thought I'd give you some kind of amazing stats about the media and climate change, #fail. These are all from our friends at Media Matters who do a very good job of visualization. So in the summer/fall of last year, there was a stunning record low in Arctic sea ice. This is sort of the canary in the coal mine for the climate system. So what did the press do? It was much more interested in Paul Ryan's weightlifting than it was in covering Arctic sea ice. Media Matters compares the amount of coverage. Then there was the campaign season in general. Climate change is a major public policy issue. You would think that it would be covered in the press. What was the press doing? Paying a lot more attention to Joe Biden's incredibly disarming smile than paying attention to climate change. And then this last one is just not even a fair fight. Ocean acidification is sort of climate change's evil twin. We are changing the pH of the oceans. All the organisms that evolved over a long period of time are not necessarily able to cope with this. Does the media cover ocean acidification? No. So they compared it to how much the media covers the Kardashians. And not a fair fight at all. So climate doesn't get a lot of coverage in the press, certainly not what we think that it deserves in proportion to its importance. That's the past. What is the media doing in the present? The main media case study that I've asked our panel to talk about is the one that just happened, which is how did the press cover what was the biggest story on climate change in at least several years, the just released Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change 5th Assessment Report. And so that's what they're going to talk about. I want to set the stage a little bit. We had one of our journalists, Tim McDonald, was over there in Stockholm. This is a picture he took of the press conference when the report was released. And as he tells us, all the journalists there were repeatedly asking the scientists about something called the global warming pause. Have you heard about this? Why is global warming slowing down, you guys? And why don't you understand it? So it turns out this is a huge diversion from the substance of the issue and from the substance of the report that was just released. It's also a major talking point of climate skeptics and deniers. The press was obsessed with it. Why were they obsessed with it? Well, partly because they invented it. Skeptics have been claiming for years that global warming has stopped or slowed down. We found examples going back to 2006, but it didn't get much traction until March of this year. We did a Google Trends search to determine how much people are Googling global warming pause, and we see a major spike because The Economist did a really big story about this that got a lot of attention, and then interest in the global warming pause, which we can explain in more detail why it's misleading, just increased and increased and increased until it became a major part of the coverage of the release of the IPCC report. So again, #fail. Now, nobody knows more about what's wrong with journalists than other journalists. So to talk about this problem of the press and climate change and to show you some examples of good coverage so that you don't basically get driven to despair, we have an excellent panel of Climate Desk affiliated reporters and one former one. And so I now am going to introduce them to you in the order in which they're going to speak. First, we are going to hear from John Metcalf of the Atlantic Cities, and he's going to tell us a little bit about how climate scientists themselves feel about how the report that they just released was covered, because he did what journalists do. He talked to them. Then we're going to hear from Kate Shepard from the Huffington Post, and she's going to explain why the press needs to do a little bit of a better job covering this whole IPCC process. Then we have Phil Plait, otherwise known as the bad astronomer from Slate, and he's going to tell us about his very interesting battles with climate skeptics and deniers. Very colorful ones, if you've read any of them. Suzanne Goldenberg from The Guardian will be next, and she's going to go a little deeper on who are these people who still reject the science. And then, finally, Kira Butler from Mother Jones is going to tell us something positive about how climate science should be covered. They're all going to talk for about 3 minutes. We're going to have a conversation. We'll have 15 minutes at the end for questions. John, somebody give the man a mic.
Hello? Okay. It's on. So I am not like Phil, who has an actual science degree. I come from a general reporting background, so I approached this like I would any other story, I think. And I believe this discussion will feature lots of depressing, frustrating stuff about skeptics. So I am glad that I have a little bit of good information about how the media covers climate change. I talked with a number of scientists who work in climate and weather, Michael Mann of the hockey stick fame, Jeff Masters, who runs Weather Underground, Bob Ryan, meteorologist in DC, some other people. And pretty much they all were in agreement that the media is covering climate change much better than it had in 2007. In terms of sheer amount of coverage, there was a big spike in 2009, 2007, 2009, and now it's gone down to a very low point. And as I will talk about in a minute, that is actually partially a good thing. Because in 2009, the majority of the media were writing about ClimateGate, this made-up scandal involving hacked emails showing climate scientists in this vast conspiracy to make up data, all false, of course. And now, in the lead up to this assessment report, the media are doing a number of things much better. And I guess I'll just jump into what they're doing well now. They're not relying so much on talking with skeptics, which is what we know as false balance. Editors, when they look at a story, they want both sides represented. That doesn't exactly work when you're reporting on science, because one side might be completely wrong. Back in 2007, a lot of media outlets were going to groups with titles like the Science and Environmental Policy Project, the Greening Earth Society, the Center for Science and Public Policy, which on their face sound like great scientific groups. I'd be surprised if there was an actual PhD among any of these groups. Most are funded by the fossil fuel industry, and it's just, in my opinion, a mistake that the media would talk to these groups. There are a few signs of hope in these climate scientists I talked with. One is that conservative outlets are actually reaching out to climate experts. Michael Mann was on Fox recently. He said the interview went pretty well. The Wall Street Journal's weather writer, Eric Holthouse, recently had a emotional breakdown in an airport after reading the latest IPCC report, in which he started crying and vowed never to fly on airplanes again because of the fossil fuel emissions they were giving off, and even went so far as to say he might have a vasectomy because he doesn't want his kids living in the world that we're going to be living in a couple decades from now. Some scientists I talked with also suggested some room for improvement. There's a lot of them were kind of grieved that there has been so much focus on the percentage of consensus among scientists. A lot of the headlines in the most recent report were 95% consensus that climate change is real, it's a threat happening now. This is going to allow skeptics to come back in a few years from now when the next report is released. It might be 96%. So they can say, look, it's only gone up 1% in the past 5 years. Climate change is not really happening. Jeff Masters of Weather Underground also thinks the media is focusing too much on hurricanes, which are great for news cycle. It's huge weather systems coming to you, going to smash you, but it's not really the immediate threat. A more immediate threat is drought, for instance, which already is kind of having some dangerous effects around the world. There's been a couple reports blaming the uprising in Syria on drought, forcing farmers into cities, creating instability. Another drought in 2010 in China, or Asia, forced China to buy up all the wheat. That created bread protest in many parts of the Middle East and may have contributed to the Arab uprising. There's much more to say. I've probably gone way over, so I'm going to hand this to...
whether it's good news that the total volume of coverage is down, and I should have had the figure that actually shows that since you brought it up, but it is way down since 2007 in terms of the total amount of attention. Kate.
So in terms of,
Let's turn it on.
says it's on. Hello.
There we go.
Hello. In terms of how it was covered this year, I think part of the challenge in covering the IPCC release this year was that, you know, there was a draft of it, and then we all covered the leaked draft. Then there was another draft, and then we wrote about the new leaked draft. And then by the time the final report came out, we were all like, well, we've already written about the report like a couple times already. And so I think that's part of the reason we saw, I think, maybe less coverage of it than we saw the last time it was released. And, you know, I want to say part of that, I think, is the fault of the IPCC process, that we spend 6 years putting together this really massive report, and it's supposed to be the definitive report, and, you know, this is what we're all waiting for, when I think it would probably be a lot more effective to do shorter, more iterative reports that are more up to date even. I mean, I think you've highlighted this, Chris, but the last study included in this year's report actually came out last March. So it's, you know, this is the latest science, but it's really even not the latest science. I mean, there's, you know, a lot that's happened since then that's not included in there. And I think it would be much more effective as a communications tool if it were to be updated more regularly. And I think that would give, you know, people who are writing about this, you know, an easier time biting off parts of it and communicating what really is new and what is the most interesting out of these reports. Another challenge, I think, is you know, those of us who've covered this for a long time know that for years now they've been saying that they're pretty certain that climate change is happening, that it's caused by human activity, and every time we see a new report, it gets more certain. But the way it's communicated is like, we're pretty certain, we're even more certain, we're more certain than we were last time. And the way they talk about it, I think, doesn't really translate that well to the public. I mean, it's science speak. It's not the way, you know, if I told you I was pretty certain about something, you would probably be a little concerned that I wasn't certain enough. When in fact, you know, 95% certainty among scientists on this fact is a really pretty damn certain. And I think they don't do a good job of communicating what exactly that means. One of the best stories I saw about the IPCC release was one that Seth Bornstein did for the Associated Press, explaining what exactly scientists were saying when they met certainty here and what it means to have 95% certainty when it comes to a scientific issue. And I think that did a really good job of making it seem real to people. I think one thing that we as reporters could do a lot better around the release of not just this report, but science more generally, is I think to do a better job of not just doing our sort of short write-up about what was in the report, but doing a better job of communicating it in different ways to the public. So using more graphics, using videos, using you know, sort of time progressions to show to people what has changed over the years. I mean, and people, I think, especially now in the age of, you know, everything being multimedia, are learning differently from the media, and I think we need to figure out how to communicate it better across multiple platforms, and that I think we also need to walk people through the scientific process. You know, I think science education in the U.S. is not great these days, and I think as reporters it's our job to explain to people how the process works. I mean, scientists aren't magicians coming up with this stuff, you know, like in their closet somewhere. They're going through a process that helps them come to these conclusions. It's not magic, it's science. And so I think we as reporters need to explain that better and walk our readers through that process as well.
Thank you. Phil?
I could just follow up on that for about an hour. Actually, I was glad when Chris said we only had 3 minutes, because that's good for my blood pressure. Yeah. Talking about this stuff is a little irritating. I'm an astronomer, and I write about astronomy mostly in science. And over the years, I've broadened that out, and I've written about a lot of different things, a lot of different attacks on science, including creationism and anti-vaccination movements and things like that. So it just became sort of natural to start writing about climate change. And I just did it. It was just a thing that started happening because I saw these attacks on what was clear, that the attacks were clearly manipulating and misusing the science to make some sort of ideological point. So I started writing about it, and it was a trial by fire. I didn't really realize, I think at the time, when I started writing about this, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, what I was getting into. Now I understand it quite well. And it's not anything I think you can teach people necessarily. Maybe, I mean, Chris actually does a very good job about how to talk to the media. But when it comes to certain specific things, sometimes it's just the kind of thing where you have to be basically thrown in, see what happens. And it's fascinating to think about what's happening in this, what I will call a battle, because it is. And what's fascinating is just to take a step back and see the tactics that are being used, even at the broadest level, including, and we've already used this term a couple of times, and let me tell you how much I hate this, climate skeptics. They're not skeptics. I'm a skeptic. A skeptic is someone who examines evidence, who makes, there's a claim being made. There's evidence about this claim. You look at the evidence and say, does this evidence hold water? Is it good? Does it make sense? What are the implications of this claim? And then weigh that evidence fairly and say, does the claim stand up? And the answer might be yes, the answer might be no, but that's the skeptical process. It's very much like the scientific process. And so to call yourself a skeptic means you're doing something fairly and in a balanced way and really examining all the evidence. That's not what's going on here, okay? People complain when I use the word denier, and it's like, well, you know what? It makes sense. When at some level, you're no longer a skeptic, you're a cynic. You're denying the evidence for whatever claim you're trying to make. That's why I use the term denier and not skeptic. And I could go into example after example after example about this, but again, 3 minutes, not very long. But I found that examining how the deniers are using sound bites and how we should be smarter about what we're doing on the side of happiness, truth, and reality is something hopefully we can cover. What Kate said about the 97%, that's fantastic. That was such a great soundbite. 97% of climate scientists agree. That's good. That's the kind of thing that the public can wrap their heads around. Talking about paleoclimatic proxies and things like that, that's hard. The IPCC report is hard. Keep it simple, keep it straightforward, see what the other side is doing, and try to understand what they're doing so that we can get out in front of that, I think is the way to go.
Very good. You were in 3 minutes too.
And don't pick a handle on Twitter where they can make fun of you by saying, "Oh, he really is a bad astronomer." Yeah, thanks. I never heard that before.
All right. Susie.
Do you want to?
Oh, we have a picture.
We have a.
Look at that. I
So.
think this man might be in the audience.
Okay, this man is in the audience now. I bet it didn't. I bet none of you noticed, but or maybe you did notice. But climate deniers might be getting under people's skin here. I think that's been a little bit evident. Now, so this picture here is of a merchandise featuring a man who is by no means a climate denier. This is Peter Glick, who is actually in the studio audience, and this is merchandise, various merchandise at the table being sold at the Heartland Climate Deniers Conference last year. And in case any of you don't know, the Heartland Institute in Chicago is one of the biggest purveyors of doubt about the science underlying climate change. And the only reason I'm showing this is to make a point about framing of the debate. And that is that climate deniers, much to the frustration of us up here, seem to be very adept at framing and defining the debate about climate change, even though the facts are not on their side. And they do it with a degree of audacity and disregard for the facts that sort of astounds everybody. So this moment should have actually been a loss and a humiliation for them because, Peter Glick had exposed the fact that they were really just shills for ultra-conservatives and the fossil fuel industry, but in fact they turned it around and tried to turn it to their advantage. Now that's something, that degree of framing and definition of the issue is something that has been difficult for the media. We have not been able to adequately frame and define the issue of climate change in a way that the public has been able to understand that it is within our power to act on climate change. I would argue that most Americans do understand that climate change is real and that they are seeing the impacts now. I mean, the polling tells us that 69% of Americans believe that there is real evidence of climate change. 40% of Americans believe that it is a real threat. But most of our reporting makes climate change seem too big, too scary. It scares the bejesus out of us. We talk about climate change in too big a way, and we do not talk about it in a way that makes people feel that they can do anything about it. So I would say that our real failure here is to frame the issue in such a way that people can feel that they can act on climate change and that the solutions are within their grasp now.
Thank you. Kira.
So I want to kind of pick up where Susie left off and talk a little more about framing. For the purpose of this panel, I took the liberty of Googling the phrase IPCC yesterday, and I came up with some less than scintillating headlines. I'd like to read you a few of them. I won't tell you where they're from. Latest IPCC climate assessment reaffirms previous findings. For researchers, IPCC leaves a deep impression. And my favorite, 5 points on the IPCC report, a long and wonky investigation. Doesn't that just make you want to click? I mean, I don't know. We all know that the science in this report is of the highest caliber and that the message is really urgent. But if we write a story with the headline, "The science is of the highest caliber and the message is really urgent," probably a few people will read it, and most of them are in this room. At Climate Desk, we talk a lot about headline writing and the importance of writing a really good headline. We even have a Skype chat that we devote to this process. I may or may not at one point have suggested for a certain story the head, "Cats, Cats, Climate Change, Cats, Cats, Cats." Yeah, right. So of course, part of the trick is writing that really good headline, but you also have to kind of draw people in. That example about Eric Holthaus and his tweet about giving up flying, Susie actually wrote a great little piece on this the other day. It was called "IPCC Report Makes U.S. Meteorologist Cry and Give Up Flying." And did it get into the nitty-gritty of the science? Not really, but it definitely conveyed the urgency of this message, and it made you want to find out more about it. Narrative journalism is also really our friend in telling the stories of climate change. When Kate was at Mother Jones, she wrote a great piece that was called "Flood, Rebuild, Repeat. Are we ready for a Superstorm Sandy every other year?" And it told the story of these families in coastal Virginia who actually had to raise their houses up on stilts to the tune of hundreds of thousands of dollars to deal with the encroaching seas. So that piece really did get into a lot of the cutting edge science behind how sea level rise and storm surges are making people's lives really, really hard. Of course, you don't always have to use narrative journalism. We do at Climate Desk a series called Explained in 90 Seconds, and these are just bite-sized kinds of videos that take one little digestible chunk of climate science and explain it to you. A recent one was called "Your Fridge is Contributing to Climate Change, but it doesn't have to." So those are some of the approaches, but the basic message is just that you have to try really, really hard to make people care about this stuff, because really you're competing with pictures of puppies, and that's tough competition. That's it.
Thank you. So listening to all of you speak, I thought many things, but one thing that I thought was the issue of responsibility seemed to be a little bit blurred, because on the one hand, we might be saying that journalists should get better, or on the other hand, we might be saying that scientists should make it easier on them. Which one are we saying?
You're oversimplifying.
Well, I'm the moderator, Phil. Because I heard both at different times, right? I mean, I'm the first to say that the IPCC is a communications, it struggles, let's put it that way.
It's everybody's fault.
Yeah.
But that's typical in science reporting. Scientists have been lamenting this for years, that just whatever the straight science is, in the media we're getting less coverage. And of course, when the big media groups are letting go of all their science writers, like CNN getting rid of Miles O'Brien and all these other things, we're seeing sort of a degradation of the science coverage. And then when bad science comes along, that's a huge opportunity. It's like the immune system of the media has been suppressed, and then the bad guys can get in there and start replicating themselves. And that's what's going on. And then what do we do? Well, yes, the media should be doing a better job, but how do you even get that started? I don't know. Certainly, having journalists who know what they're talking about is a big help. Training scientists to do this better, I think, is a fantastic way of doing it. And Chris does that. That's incredibly important because scientists tend to talk to other scientists. And it's funny, I'll see these plots put up, or graphs or whatever, put up on the internet, and I'll see that and go, oh my God, that's awful. And then if I show that to somebody who doesn't understand the science, they don't see it. You've got to be able to explain this. The scientists need to be able to explain this. And scientists like to say, look, I can just write this stuff up, and the data will speak for themselves. And it's like, well, how's that working out for you? Not so great. So we need to have all of these things have to happen. The scientists need to learn to do it better. It would be nice if we could get the media to do it better. Barring that, we need to speak to the media better and maybe get more people like me who aren't necessarily the media, but get more people writing about this online and blogs and things like that who know what they're talking about and know how to communicate to the public.
Anybody else want to take a bite on this one?
I would say once again, it's not about the science. I think that battle is won. It's a political battle that has yet to be won, and it's a battle about solutions. I think that's a false idea that we have to still fight the fight about science. I mean, the deniers are out there. They are funded by ultra-conservative forces. That fight is still going on. But if we keep engaging with that fight, we'll lose the fight that really is ahead of us, is to get the solutions in place and to get business and to get cities and to get states to put the solutions in place by 2020 so that they're in place now. Don't fight that fight. That's the fight behind us. Do the fight, put the solutions in place now. The political battle is the one that counts now.
Okay.
I'd say that I agree that, all those things are true, that there's some fault in all parts. But I also think that I want to turn this around on media consumers as well, because you need to support good reporting on this. Can't tell you how many reporters I work with and know in Washington who are amazing science and political reporters who cover these issues, but they're working at trade publications that aren't really for the mass market. They used to work at newspapers, and then they lost their jobs, and now they work at something that's behind a really high paywall that no one can afford to buy, but they're doing great reporting back there. I think in general, as consumers, we need to support good media, whether that's nonprofit media or by writing in support and saying that you think environmental coverage is important to your local or national publication, and also just clicking on and sharing articles that you think are good, because that's how you get to keep doing good journalism, is by having people who actually read it.
I want to clarify something here. It's come up several times that there are, and this is an objective statement, there are fewer science and environmental reporters at mainstream publications. This is about a 10-year trend of decline in the idea that you can have a whole career doing this, although some of us fortunately still do. But what is the relationship between that and something like coverage going down since 2007, or something like skeptics still getting quoted when they probably shouldn't? I'm not sure if that's causal. I mean, are these separate things? What do we think about that?
I'll jump in again. The idea of going to the skeptics, and I'm going to make air quotes when I use that word on that side, that's just a part of journalism training, to get both sides of an issue. And on many issues, especially political issues, there are two sides. I can argue a conservative or a progressive side on a lot of issues. But when it comes to the science, you're right. The science, we're done. We know that this is true. And I don't mean to imply that we should still be arguing the science. I mean, we need to be still discussing the science, and the scientists should still be talking about this, because there is this other side. I think that journalists are always going to go to the other side. How do we stop that? I think that's a part of journalism.
But I think a science reporter wouldn't as often go to the other side.
It would be like having an argument about the flat Earth and going, talking about satellites and then talking to somebody from the Flat Earth Society to argue against it. You don't do that.
Yeah.
So that's a science thing versus a journalistic thing. But I think that maybe you may have your finger on something there, that when you lose the expertise in science journalism and you bring in somebody who's a journalist from another area, they want to bring in that balance, and it turns out to be a false balance.
Others, yeah.
I would just like to back that up 100%. I think that our industry is in such a state of disarray that we are struggling to find competent people who know what they're talking about in terms of climate science. One guy I talked with, Bud Ward, he runs the Climate Forum at Yale. He comes from an environmental journalist background, he's not a scientist. But he said with all these staffing cuts, more general assignment reporters moving over the climate beat, the media has failed us in reporting climate change, but it's failed us in a number of issues. You know, we're just failing in a lot of ways right now. And until we get more money and experienced reporters, I think that might be a trend.
Well, this happened at the same time that newspapers cut all their foreign bureaus. They cut the stuff that they basically didn't think was giving them enough revenue for the cost. And it turned out to be that science coverage was the same as having a foreign bureau in that respect.
I would push back on that a little bit and say that I think that climate stories especially do a lot better than a lot of people give them credit for. I mean, you know, I'm a Huffington Post. We have a lot to compete with on the website there, but our stories on climate change do really well because a lot of people actually really do want to read about it. And so I think this idea that like no one will read your climate change story is sort of this myth that needs to be busted, because I think it actually is a very hot topic right now, not to make a silly joke, but yeah.
Yeah, just to add something to that, I mean, climate change is not just a story about science, it's a story about people. And if you tell people stories, like Kate did in this story that I was just talking about sea level rise, or if you do what our climate desk reporters did a little while ago and go talk to some nuns who are protesting fracking near their convent, people will read about those things, and they will also read about the climate change along with it and be interested in it.
Anybody else on this? Another thing that I just want to try to nail down objectively as far as we can. So there was a very much cited paper by a guy named Max Boykoff, I think it was in about the year 2004, 2003, in which he looked at the top 4 US newspapers, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, et cetera. He found that basically they'd covered climate change in a balanced way, and what that meant was that they were quoting an other side on the substance of the science. And then subsequently people continued to study this, including him, and you know, circa more like 2007 or to 2009, when there was this high watermark of attention to the issue, people were showing that balance was going away in terms of the content of coverage in the major newspapers. What do you guys feel about now? Do you feel like balance is coming back? I mean, I certainly saw one amazing example of, quote, balance by CBS covering the IPCC report, where they went scientist, skeptic, I'm done. What do you think?
I'm not sure. My personal opinion is maybe not, but the scientists I talk with, they were very happy in that the media nowadays is actively searching out experts, trying to get them quoted in their pieces.
But the global warming pause was created by skeptics, and a lot of them
That was pretty bad.
I mean, they got a lot of attention for it in the media. So.
Well, I guess you might have to differentiate between their news reporting and their op-ed section. The op-ed section of the Wall Street Journal is basically a hive of villainy. When they have an op-ed that says, no, CO2, more CO2 is going to be great. The plants will grow and it'll be warmer in cold climates, and it's like, no, not at all. And so I can't vouch for whether the reporting is getting better, because I tend to see the op-ed pages. Unfortunately, in my position, I tend to be more reactive than proactive. So when I see somebody making a ridiculous claim, I will come in and say, no, that's not what's going on, unless there is some really interesting tidbit I can sink my teeth into for the science. But to answer your question, I don't know. Yeah. I know that the op-ed pages, for some places, and you can make a list. There are a couple of British newspapers as well. Daily Mail, excuse me, something stuck in my throat, that basically could not find the truth with both hands and a pickaxe. So it's just one of those things where the op-ed pages are awful, and I don't think they're getting any better.
Anybody else want to take a crack at balance?
Can I just say something?
Well, we're going to go to...
Well, weren't the leaks, but the leaks all went to the Murdoch-owned papers. So I just thought I'd interject that. I mean, you were talking about how leaked and leaked. It leaked to specific papers.
Everybody had the leaked document before very long, including probably all of us here. So, but that,
Well, who was making the leaks, right? Anybody could have
I
been
don't
an editor
know
on
who
the
actually made
IPCC.
the original leak. I think this is an interesting question about the leaks, and it also brings up whose fault it is. I mean, should the scientists have better control of this? They ought to realize that if this happens, they lose control of the narrative. And if this happens and they're not out there immediately communicating what they actually mean, which I didn't see happen, then it's just everyone can pick whatever part of it they want and figure out what the story is, which is why the global warming pause, I would argue, happened, was because you got this leaked document and it talks about the pause in very incautious language. And what are the scientists saying? They're not ready to say anything yet.
Well, with the sort of leak situation, they also then exploit any changes that happen between them because it is this long process, and there's new drafts to new drafts, new drafts, and they change things, usually to make them more accurate or to reflect whatever the consensus of the people working on it is.
Yeah.
But then those changes are exploited by deniers as well. So that whole process is sort of ripe for them to find ways to disrupt it.
And there have been new leaks even since then of the next. Whoa, careful. The denier, they're getting revenge on you, Phil. I just saw that the part 2, has already been leaked. The next IPCC, the impacts, I think it was, is already getting out and being spun.
I mean, I think part of the issue here, and it's something that the scientists themselves discuss, is that the whole IPCC structure, the whole way these reports are set up is so outdated. And so out of sync with the way the modern communications worked. And, this whole idea of having an exercise done every 6 or 7 years and the consensus report and everything, it just doesn't fit in with the way communications work. And that's why you have leaks, because how can hundreds of scientists keep a secret? And, and also I think there's a very real question of how useful is it to have one big report coming out every 6 or 7 years? Wouldn't it be more useful to have more frequent, focused reports looking at a specific issue?
It also might be more useful is that, so I talked to Max Boykoff, the guy who also does media trends. And again, 2007, IPCC wins the Nobel Prize, Al Gore, et cetera. That's the peak for total volume of coverage. It goes down. It goes up for ClimateGate, which is very bad, goes down. There's another spike before it then goes down again. You guys know what that is? It's Superstorm Sandy. So maybe that is a bigger communication moment in some ways than the IPCC.
You've brought up an irony, and that is that studies have shown, I'll just throw, studies have shown, I love that sort of passive thing, that people will pay more attention to climate change when there's a big climate event, or a weather event like a superstorm, or a big drought, or the flooding in Boulder, which I just lived through because I live there. As a scientist, I hate to say we should take advantage of that because that can be misconstrued. I don't mean to take advantage of it in that we should make crap up like some deniers do. But on the other hand, when something like that happens, to put the word out and say, this is the kind of thing we expect. We don't know if this string of tornadoes, if this superstorm, if this drought, if this flood is due to climate change, but extremes are the new normal. This is the kind of thing we expect with higher temperatures, with more energy in the climate system. Keep talking about that because it will get into people's heads. It's not wrong. You can't say this is due to climate change. That would be wrong. But if you bring it up, if you use something like that as a hook to talk to people about it, it's fair, it's honest, it's scientific, and you just have to be careful with how you phrase it so that you're not wrong. And I don't see a problem with that at all.
I completely agree. I think every time there's an extreme weather event, we see it kind of as an opportunity to engage people in this discussion. We do a lot of explanatory reporting where we say, is climate change to blame for X, Y, or Z thing, for the wildfire, for the drought, for the hurricane? And we really run through, yes, we know that climate change is doing X, Y, and Z, but no, we're not positive that it's causing this specific event, and here's why. And it's really an opportunity to start a conversation and to engage people in the science.
But those are moments where it's hard to get scientists to agree with each other in those moments, actually. Those are the moments when people care the most, but they're not the moments when the scientists are necessarily ready to be proactive with their message necessarily.
So sort of a related topic. I'm going to be a little bit harder on my journalism peers than I have been so far. But about a little bit over a month ago, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration put out this new. It was basically a report on reports looking at 18 studies on 12 different extreme weather events and trying to say, in which ones could we see a climate signal? So which ones was there some evidence that climate change either exacerbated the problem or contributed to it in some way? And they found that in about half of those, so about 6 out of the 12 events, they could see a fairly clear climate signal. This is droughts, this is heat waves, this is flooding from Superstorm Sandy. Sorry, they looked at reports on drought, but they found that the drought that they were looking at in this case was not related to climate change. But anyway, that's kind of down the wormhole there. Anyway, on the phone call about this report, I had to listen to a lot of my reporter colleagues who were just having a really hard time trying to figure out what the takeaway was. And the takeaway was sort of unclear, right? It was like half of them were related and half of them weren't. And they were just sort of getting really stressed out about the fact that there wasn't like one clear, obvious takeaway. And I think that's sort of, a lot of times as reporters, we're stressed out and we have a lot to do and we want to figure out what the headline is. And with science, it's not always that easy. And sometimes you have to write a really nuanced story, but that's the facts. You got to write a nuanced story sometimes.
Well, and just an advice for scientists who want to communicate. If you put journalists in that situation of stress, where they're trying to figure out what the story is and you didn't tell them already, they might choose just about anything. So it's probably better to tell them what the story is, rather than let them find it themselves. Anybody else? Okay, I think that if you guys want to add anything to what we've covered so far, anybody have something that they're dying to say that has been, besides you, Phil? No, just kidding. About skeptics? You haven't beaten them into the ground quite enough yet, so.
I'm holding back a little bit.
Okay. Well, then I think we're going to take some audience questions. And so please raise your hand. I'm going to have to repeat your question because we have a live stream and it won't pick you up at all. Something also important about questions before any of them get asked, it is very important that they take the form of ending with the symbol. And also that they not have a huge amount of exposition prior to the symbol. So to copy Jeopardy, please phrase your question in the form of a question. Thank you very much, and I'm sure we'll have no misunderstandings now. Sir.
If you would, maybe give us your ages, if you don't mind. And are any of you of your generation pissed off that our generation is left in this environmental disaster?
Thank you. The question was, first, could the panelists state their ages, which I guess you can opt out of if you'd like, but you don't have to. And then after stating your ages, will you say whether you're mad at the generation older than you for having left this mess? Go to it. I'm 36. I'm not mad, really. But okay. Yeah.
I'm early 30s. I wasn't mad until I actually started reporting on it and realized how much energy had gone into just knocking down the science on part of our elected leaders and the fossil fuel industry. That part pisses me off, but part of our misunderstanding or non-understanding of climate change, I think, deals with the fact it's just, we're right in the middle of learning a lot of new stuff about it. As humans, we're not hardwired to respond to threats maybe a couple hundred years in the future or even a few decades in the future. So I understand why there was so much inaction, in part just because people didn't really comprehend what was happening.
Right. I think that's probably why I'm not mad either, is because I don't think people knew. And even if they did know, I think people kind of put things off and deny things. Who's next?
I'll be next.
Okay.
I'm 33, and I think we waste a lot of time and energy railing against the boomers, but I don't think it really gets us anywhere. I'd prefer to spend our energy trying to do something about it. So no, I'm not really mad.
I'm 29. I'm also not mad. I actually think the last generation did a lot of really good stuff. EPA, Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, those are kind of big deals. So I think that we have a lot of work to do, but I'm also very heartened to think about how fast things actually can change when people put their mind to it, to think about the way the US was just a generation ago and just how much has changed in a lot of different social and cultural aspects of the country. I think that we are capable of big change pretty quickly if we want to.
I think I'm still a boomer. But, so do I feel guilty about what I've done? No. I don't think, not me, because, angry about finding this out? No, because I think that you're talking about changing the whole way the economy is organized. This is a really huge ship to turn around, and it's very hard to turn around anything this big, and it is going to take time. I get angry about it sometimes. Do I think do I expect it'll take long? Yes, but I also, I go back and forth. Sometimes I think it's moving very slowly. Other times I see signs of hope. So I sort of, have this totally sort of back and forth kind of response.
I'm 48 and I'm angry at everybody. Get off my lawn. Actually, no, I'm actually not angry, and for the same reason that we've been saying. We didn't know until relatively recently, and you can always talk about like what was that thing in the 70s with Time magazine, global cooling and all that. Nobody really knew what was going on, and certainly there was a huge disconnect between the scientists and the media. We still have that now. I'm more frustrated than anything else because, as you mentioned earlier, we're done with this. We're not done with the science. We're still learning a lot. But the broad conclusion that global warming is real and we're the cause of it is pretty much done at this point. We know this for a fact. When the IPCC, which is extremely conservative, is even saying 95% or better certainty that this is true, yeah, we're pretty much good there. I'm just frustrated that you can't even rub people's noses in this and say, look, here it is, and have them go, oh, yeah, you're right. We're still fighting that battle. That's what makes me frustrated more than anything else. And I think, you're backlit, I can't tell, but I suspect we're of the same generation. Yeah, you have to pick these things up. There are things you learn, science learns with time. We've learned that asteroids are a threat over time. I would put climate change in front of that as more of a global threat. To let you know, and I'm a big asteroid impact person. I love talking about that. So you have to figure this stuff out, and then you have to figure out what to do about it. And that's where we are right now, I think.
Yes, ma'am, right there.
How can we best implore the media to do more coverage on global warming and less on twerking and LOL?
Okay, how can we best implore the media to do more coverage of global warming, less on twerking and lolcats?
I can promise you I will never, ever write a story about twerking. Cats, I'm not so sure.
You need to write about how twerking is being affected by the heat.
That's exactly right, Phil. I was just going to say I would like all of the reporters who I edit to figure out a way to connect twerking and climate change. If anybody can do that, you have a free blog post.
Well, it'll be hotter, and so people will wear less clothes.
Chris, write that story.
Miley Cyrus could be hit by a hurricane.
I mean,
yeah, we get the AMS to like Hurricane Miley. Then yeah, it'll be great news.
I write about climate change on the Huffington Post, so I write next to Miley twerking. I like to say, come for the climate change, stay for the twerking, or come for the twerking, stay for the climate change, whatever your persuasion. I think you can, find ways of making it more appealing to people. And to reiterate my plug from earlier, support media that you like and journalists that you like, and make sure their editors know that they're important. And give them money.
Yeah.
Especially nonprofit news, give them lots of money.
Anybody else? And if you are not going to give them actual money, just use social media, share the stuff you like. That actually helps increase its impact, so just do that. Let's take another question. Yes, right there, sir? Yeah.
To what extent do you think the conventional media that covers weather in a big way, like CNN, Weather Channel, weather.com, how responsible are they being in relating significant weather events to climate change? And are they getting more responsible? Can they become more responsible?
So the question is, media covers weather all the time, constantly. The people who are doing that for huge audiences, CNN, and others, are they doing a good job of providing the climate, I'm paraphrasing the question, but are they doing a good job of providing the climate change context in their weather coverage or not?
Well, I don't know if people know or not, but sort of meteorology seems to be the sort of last redoubt of climate deniers. And there's, you know,
I think
a
it's
hard,
changing, but yeah.
but there is a hardcore of climate deniers among meteorologists. But it is changing, as you say, and you've got Capital Weather Gang, for example, at the Washington Post that makes this sort of weather-climate connection quite well. Eric Holthaus, who we've mentioned here on this panel, he makes the connection. And I think there is a trend towards making reference to climate change and weather on an increasing basis. And you know, I haven't got data to back it up, but just my own perception is that people are making that connection more and more frequently, and that networks are making that connection more frequently.
It's weird. I know a lot of meteorologists. I worked with some of them at a TV station in Virginia. A lot just total skeptics. I don't exactly know where it's coming from. In some cases, it was religion. In others, I think a New York Times story pointed out that meteorologists are often focused on, you know, the weather of today and tomorrow, not decades from now. But yeah, I do believe that is changing, partly due to all these outlets, these TV outlets needing a website and getting web traffic. And if they keep on running these stories denying climate change, it makes them look really bad. Like they'll get trashed in the comment sections, their traffic will decrease. That's my opinion, at least.
I'll just plug one of our past Climate Desk Live events. The video is totally available, and this was from June, when we had a meteorologist, Stu Ostro from the Weather Channel, and a climate scientist, Jennifer Francis from Rutgers, and they were not at loggerheads. They were totally in agreement that there's something very crazy about the weather. And Stu Ostro, again, a meteorologist, not a climate scientist, just said that he's been seeing so many really extreme highs of the sort that create blocking patterns, of the sort that create extreme weather, and he just doesn't see how this could be non-cause and just happening when he hasn't seen them before, and he's been doing a lot of forecasting for a long time. So that's one person who has changed. And when they change, they talk, and they talk the language that other meteorologists understand, talking about 100 millibar heights. Why are they so, you know, why is there so much high pressure? So I think it might be changing. Any other questions? I think we saw a lot. Yes?
I work at University of Colorado in the climate change science outreach program. Aside from science and aside from weather, what topics do you need more information on as journalists to write stories about climate change?
What topics do journalists need more information on in order to tell good stories about climate change? But you had a caveat. Aside from Okay. So aside from the basic science, what kind of stories do we need more information on in order to tell? Yeah. Yeah. How can we help you?
A big one is adaptation, how people are already dealing with the effects of climate change. We love to hear people's stories. We love to hear about the science behind adaptation. We love to hear about companies that are doing interesting things to help people adapt. All of that stuff is really interesting and useful to us.
And I'd say particularly stories with characters, specific characters, strong characters who can tell a bigger story through that you can use that to tell a bigger story, because that's what gets people reading. You know, they come and they want to read about people and how they're experiencing it, not just about, you know, the science, but you can use that to tell the story.
Anybody else? Let's take another question. Michael.
When us boomers were kids, we used to think about the future a lot. And when we saw stories about NASA in the newspaper, it was about, you know, what is the 21st century going to be like. I don't see a lot of talk about the 22nd century in the news anymore. So is it journalism's job to speak about the future? And if not, whose job is it?
That's an interesting question, big question. Saying that, you know, he remembers that people used to always talk about, because you describe yourself as a boomer, right? What the 21st century would be like before we were there, but now he doesn't see the media talking about what the 22nd century will be like, so why the heck not? Never thought about that. But anybody?
maybe it's just a numbers thing. Like in 1975, it's conceivable you'd be alive in 2000, but let's face it, 1913, I don't think you're going to be, sorry, but I don't think you're going to, I won't either be here in 2100. I don't know.
I think the media has changed. I mean, I remember landing on the moon, and the media, we used to have 3 channels, and people would sit and read the newspaper. They would read magazines, and now it's more short form stuff. It's more viral videos. It's getting the stuff out there. It's gone, and even Hollywood's reflecting that, where movies they're gone in a week. So if they don't have a good opening weekend, you don't even remember them. And so nowadays, just the entire genre of getting information to people has changed. That might be different. And as far as this, there's no Apollo moment. There isn't a space race. There isn't something that you can do right now that's going to be huge, that's going to get to get sort of into the public consciousness about this. It's going to have to take, I'm guessing, that it's going to take time. It's going to be one event after another. And then at some point we're going to look back and go, how did we miss this at all?
But MIT is getting closer to creating a lightsaber. So. That got people's attention, yeah.
One thing I was going to say is I think it's also because of the pace of change now. It's really, I mean, to think about what life is like now, I couldn't have imagined it 10 years ago. So it's really hard to think about what it might be like in 10 years from now. Like, I mean, things have changed quickly so already.
Isn't this kind of on us? I mean, why the heck couldn't we do a very good story of what a coastal city looks like in 2050? That has adapted, and then imagine, with a lot of information, one that hasn't adapted, and compare them. I mean, you could actually do a lot with that.
There have been stories like that.
I
remember where it was. Somebody was writing about Miami,
yeah,
and how Miami's going to be underwater in some amount of years because of all of the erosion and the aquifers and all this stuff.
Rolling Stone, right? The Rolling Stone had a story about that.
Right, you're right.
Was that the Rolling Stone?
Rolling Stone.
Yeah. So and talk about the right audience for that sort of thing. That's perfect. It may still be that we need to establish this more firmly in people's minds before they're willing to accept that this isn't science fiction.
I think Climate Central's done some really interesting sort of mapping on what to expect in the future. I mean, I think there are some interesting projects, but I mean, absolutely, we could be doing more.
Let's take one last question, and then we are at an hour. Yeah.
You guys do great work. How do you measure the impact of your reporting? What metrics do you track in addition to straight up clicks on your articles?
What metrics do we use to determine that our great work is great and having a lot of impact? Thank you for that. How do we measure?
If I could just talk about Mother Jones and Climate Desk, we use a bunch of different metrics. We use Google Analytics to track our web visits. We have a system called Chartbeat where we can see kind of real time how many visitors are on each page. But in addition to that, we look at Twitter, we look at Facebook, and we track all other kinds of social media too, just to sort of get a read on how, not only how many people are looking at any given story, but how much conversation each story is generating.
Yeah, I think we sort of also look at social media and how much it's being shared, and sort of people who are following us on social media channels as well, because that sort of indicates that they might want to actually read more in the future from us, in addition to just pure page views.
Can everybody continue to answer the question, but can you throw in what was the most viral climate story, if you know? I'd like to hear that, actually.
I wish I knew at Huffington. I don't know the answer.
Okay. The most viral one that I did that was just climate change was actually just the five terrifying statements from the leaked IPCC report with 5 bulleted items. That was the best I've done on climate change. On other things, they do seem to do more. Anyway.
I think a big one for us was when James West and Tim McDonnell went to hang out with a troll, one of our biggest trolls, at his house.
A climate troll.
Yeah, and they literally took their video camera into his living room, and they found out that I was just talking with these guys before the panel about this. This guy was actually like this lovable teddy bear of a guy. And I don't know, you guys should all watch this video because it's fascinating, but it did really, really well.
A climate change one.
But also answer the original question of how you measure what your impact is. Yeah.
The one that came to mind wasn't climate change. It was on toilet paper.
Well, there you go.
Sadly, but it was on, and it just went huge. Actually, fracking in Texas went viral as well, which was a climate desk collaboration. That was in fracking and water use. That went huge. But we measure that by and stuff on climate deniers has gone huge as well. And we measure it the same way everybody else does, by clicks, by Twitter, by Facebook, by comments, and the kind of comments that are, and the kind of discussion that takes place, the quality of discussion.
In terms of how I measure my success, I guess, it's the internet age, so we have this thing called the comment section, and it is typically full of cranky people who really want to yell at you. I think if I somehow manage to write like a near perfect climate story, I'm really happy when there's no negative comments, and even happier when skeptics jump in to try and trash the story, and then other commenters pile on top of them, telling them how wrong they are. I really like the comment section for that reason nowadays. Most viral story, I think might be a programmer in the UK who wrote a bot for Twitter that goes around correcting skeptics on their bad science. Kind of just like, excuse me, but this is wrong. Here's a link to the research. And it had like probably spammed 500,000 people by the time I wrote about him. And it went viral because it was about the internet, probably.
That was a good one. Yeah.
I guess I judge my success in getting a story out by how many jerks I have to block on Twitter. How much hate mail I get. I hate to put it that way, but in a sense that's true, right? The closer you get to cutting into a nerve of the climate denial, the more they're going to react and go, "Arr, arr, this is wrong." I don't like to think of it that way because I'd rather be positive about it and write about the actual science. It's hard to say what was most successful, what's most viral, because over time, as you write more about this, you reach more people. And I found that right before the IPCC report came out, I was writing about this every day, and I want to say that my traffic was actually going down. I think people were just getting sick of reading about it. Maybe it's because it's depressing. I don't know. Okay. Or they're just filled with, they're at saturation with the idea. But on the other hand, once the report came out, and I wrote something and talking about what you guys were talking about earlier. I tweeted it saying, and I think I had the headline, it said, "Climate change, it's real and it's us." And so you have 5 points, 5 terrifying things about the report. Things like that, those are extremely popular on the web. Look at these.
Listicles, yeah.
The listicles, yeah. And something people can read and go, oof, that works really well.
Well, I think in general, just things that are quick reads, that are easy, like clear takeaways, those do well. I'm just thinking back over the years too. I do a lot of coverage of legislation and policy and politics in Washington, and things where I just explained in plain English what's happening in a bill always did really well because people didn't really have time to read some really wonky digest of the bill. They just wanted to know what the takeaway was.
Okay. Well, we are actually officially out of time. I'm sure the panelists would be happy to talk with you further afterwards, but thank you all for coming, and thanks to our panel.